India, world's largest democracy. It represents the possibility of people of different religions, cultures, languages living together in harmony and enjoying the freedom to live, opine, and to be what they want to be. This freedom is a result of efforts of Indians extraordinaire, some of whom changed the course of history to make this nation as we know today. The revolt of 1857 charged up the country. Every heart was full of patriotism and wanted to resist the rulers in every possible way. It was in this atmosphere, on 9th May 1866, was born Gopal Krishna Gokhale in a poor Brahmin household in Kotluk in Ratnagiri. After the early demise of his father, his elder brother Govind sacrificed his own education to enable and support little Gopal to finish his education and gave India its most brilliant parliamentarian.
Gokhale was precocious. He did his matriculation at least a couple of years before any other child of his generation. His graduation from Elphinstone was also at an early age, 18. And after a short stint in the New English School in Pune, he was appointed lecturer at Fergusson College at the age of 20.
त्यांची स्मरणशक्ती फार जबरदस्त. त्यामुळे अनेक पुस्तकातली उत्तरे ते पाठ म्हणून दाखव. मिल्टनचं पॅराडाइज लॉस्ट आणि शेक्सपियरची काही नाटकं त्यांना मुखोद्गत होती.
Gokhale, being inspired by the early idealism of Tilak, joined the newly founded New English School as a teacher. It is there that he first came into contact with Tilak, and later on, as his ideas matured, he was drawn more to Agarkar and started moving or gravitating away from Tilak towards Agarkar, who later on introduced him to his mentor Mahadev Govind Ranade.
Justice Ranade was really the person behind the curtain of a number of movements at that time, social, political. But because he was a government servant, he could not come to forefront, and therefore he led from behind. Almost Ranade ruled Pune at that time, and Gokhale was trained as a moderate politician in the school of Ranade. I mean, there is no exaggeration in saying this.
Well, his relationships with Justice Ranade were probably the most significant in those formative years. They were significant primarily because I think it is from Justice Ranade that he derived much of his thinking on economic and social issues. From that kind of an interaction, it was of course a Guru Shishya kind of tradition that was followed. And I think what the Shishya learnt from his Guru is that economic, social and political reforms have to go hand in hand. That there can be a calibration of the reforms, but you can't first emphasize reforms of one side at the expense of the others. So I think the natural linkages between the social, the economic and the political is something that he grasped from Ranade.
Earlier, Dadabhai Nauroji had written a book called The Drain Theory, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India, where he had said that the British people are levying very heavy charges on the Indians. But it was Gokhale who went all the way to classify all of those charges and to quantify them and to produce figures on them, which he did in the Welby Commission. And he estimated that something like 20 crores rupees annually was the cost of British rule in India.
20 crore rupees in 1897 was a huge amount. Though not an economist by education, with the help of Rao Bahadur Joshi and Ranade, Gokhale proved the Great Drain theory. He was probably the first economist from India to do so.
गोखले यांनी जे काय वेलबी कमिशन पुढे जे काय सांगितलं त्याचा सारांश असा हिंदुस्थानचा कारभार जो चाललेला आहे तो सर्वच्या सर्व ब्रिटिश अधिकाऱ्यांच्या हातात कुठल्या तरी एखाद्या घटनेच्या कलमाने तो कारभार नियंत्रित झालेला नाही मुख्य त्याची जबाबदारी ही भारत सरकारची आणि ते सरकार भारत मंत्री म्हणजे सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट त्याला जबाबदार आहे आणि सेक्रेटरी ऑफ स्टेट आणि व्हाईसरॉय हे दोघेही जण ब्रिटिश पार्लमेंटला जबाबदार आहेत म्हणजे हिंदुस्थानच्या लोकांना कोणी जबाबदार नव्हते.
The satisfaction of the remarkable feat that he achieved in his Welby Commission testimony, however, was short-lived. Plague had spread in India, with Pune at its epicenter. The British government had taken drastic steps to stop its spread. This did not go down well with the conservative population. Contact of the British Army with the women was looked upon as an insult. Gokhale got all the updates in London. He was very upset by the news of modesty of women being outraged. He gave an interview to the Manchester Guardian to this effect.
ते छापून आल्यानंतर मुंबईच्या सरकारमध्ये अतिशय वादळ होतं आणि ते सरकारी अधिकारी अतिशय संतप्त झाले पण एकही जण साक्ष द्यायला पुरावा द्यायला पुढे आला नाही.
Everything backfired on Gokhale. A confused Gokhale consulted his mentor Ranade, who advised him to issue an apology. People from all sections criticized Gokhale, but Gokhale learned from this distressful incident. He never again spoke without evidence in his hand.
Sarvajanik Sabha, founded by Ranade, it worked as a kind of messenger between the government, British government and the people. Tilak wanted to capture the Sarvajanik Sabha and he fought elections and naturally Ranade Gokhale panel was defeated.
Dilkansa! Vijayaso! Dilkansa! Vijayaso! Dilkansa! Vijayaso! Dilkansa! Vijayaso! Dilkansa!
Then Ranade had to establish another Deccan Sabha. Tilak took charge of that Sarvajanik Sabha and then he played his extremist politics through that Sarvajanik Sabha. And therefore, the relationship between British government and Sarvajanik Sabha was spoiled. Now, British government henceforth was no more in a position to recognize Sarvajanik Sabha as its friend.
Thus, India's political leaders stood divided between extremists and moderates. Though their end was the same, their ideologies and means of achieving the end were different.
I think Gokhale was very clear. Social reforms had to precede political reforms. You needed to create a social base, I'd say even a political culture base within society before you aspired for political independence. Lokmanya Tilak's approach was just the contrary. First, let's get independence, and then let the Indians then decide what the social reforms ought to be, what their pace ought to be, what their ends ought to be.
While teaching at Fergusson College, Gokhale was writing for the English version of Agarkar Sudharak, working for the Sarvajanik Sabha and also for the Congress. When the differences between Tilak and Agarkar reached a peak, Tilak did not fail to mention Gokhale's multitasking in his 80-page resignation letter to the Deccan Education Society. This hurt Gokhale, and while he contemplated quitting the Fergusson College, other members stopped him. As the society was still in its initial stages, Gokhale took up the responsibility of raising fund for the Deccan Education Society. He used all his free time and contacts with Parsi businessmen for this purpose. The beautiful Victorian buildings, which stand tall even today, are a testimony of his efforts. In 1901, Ranade passed away, and Gokhale came to head the moderate political movement in India. He was also selected to be a member of the Imperial Legislative Council.
All parting in life is sad, but where the heart's deepest feelings are involved, the severance of old ties and the necessity of saying goodbye is about as trying an ordeal as any that a man can be called upon to go through. And yet, I'm giving up all this to embark on stormy and uncertain sea of the public life. But I hear within me a voice which urges me to take this course. And I can only ask you to believe me that it is purely from the sense of duty.
Having resigned from Fergusson College, Gokhale was now ready to present the problems of Indians in the Imperial Council.
The hallmark of Gokhale's concerns, right, overarching concern, used to be his calling attention of not only the Britishers but also the Indians, the intellectuals in India, the policymakers, the administrators, and so on, to the great exploitation that Indians were being subjected to due to British rule in India.
First, what is the status of us Indians in this empire? Secondly, what is the extent of the responsibility which lies on the imperial government to ensure to us just and humane and gradually even equal treatment in this empire?
So Gokhale's economics, like that of Ranade or Nauroji and all of his contemporaries, was how to change the policy, right, and how to become a free country where we would be able to dictate our own policy. So what you would find is some recurring themes through all of his speeches and writings, which point out to the very pernicious social and economic effects of British policies.
Our finances have been so managed as to lend support to the view that other interests take precedence of Indian interest in the administration of Indian revenues.
Gokhale had a strong will, and Britishers knew this. Gokhale also had guts. Okay, he had proved his mettle. You know, when he used to speak in Parliament, in Council, when he used to witness, he used to put his case so strongly. So he had simply no need to use any, unparliamentary words.
This is the first time within my experience that a legislative measure has been opposed by all classes and all sections of public in this country with such an absolute unanimity. Of course, with our legislative councils as they are constituted at present, the government has the power to pass any law as it pleases.
He was non-threatening. Even his rivals, and that included British officials, who quivered in their shoes whenever he rose up to speak. All right, I mean, they were They were so certain that he's going to rip apart the budget that was presented that they took extra precautions to prepare for that date. But even then, there was an enormous amount of respect for him by the colonial rulers. And that is because he was, to put it bluntly, a gentleman. You don't get too many of that kind today.
The respect that Gokhale commanded is apparent from the fact that Lord Curzon, a conservative and one of the shrewdest viceroys India ever saw, recommended his name for the title of Companion of Indian Empire, which was conferred on Gokhale in 1904.
The lucidity with which he used to marshal his facts and figures and the lucidity with which he used to place them before the council. You do not find many lucid economists even today in the country, right? That was this thing. So the second was his complete mastery over the material that he was. The third thing was his consciousness of what is happening in Britain and contrasting it with what is happening in India, and therefore showing the double-faced character of the British politicians in India.
The British government in England, with its vast naval and military concerns and its foreign relations extending over the surface of whole globe, has not found its law insufficient for its purpose. How then has the government of India, with its more limited concerns, found it necessary to make the law more drastic in India? The explanation, I think, is simple. It is that while in England, the government dare not touch the liberty of the press, no matter how annoying its disclosures may be, and has to reconcile itself to the latter, regarding them as only so much as a journalistic enterprise. In India, the unlimited power which government possesses inclines it constantly to repressive legislation. This single measure suffices to illustrate the enormous difference between the spirit in which the administration is carried on in India and it is carried on in England.
He said there is nothing to compliment about the fact that revenues are more than expenditures, for two reasons. One was that the country was going through a depression, and in a depressed economy, we now know, because Keynes has taught us since 1936 onwards, after 1936, that in a depressed economy, budgetary surplus is not advocated. It depresses the economy even further. So in a depressed economy, he found that there was a budgetary surplus and there was a lot of self-complementing. So he said, this is absolutely wrong. In a depressed economy, he didn't, of course, say you should finance deficits, but he would say that there should be more expenditures or lesser taxes.
A surplus of 7 crores of rupees is perfectly unprecedented in the history of Indian finance. The apparent paradox of a suffering country and an overflowing treasury stands easily explained and is a clear proof of the fact that the national taxation is kept unjustifyingly high even when the government are in a position to lower that level. That India is not only a poor, very poor country, but its poverty is steadily growing. And in the administration of its finances, therefore, due regards must always be had to this central, all-important fact.
Now, one thing about Gokhale was, he would not only stop at saying lesser taxes or greater expenditure. He would give concrete suggestions. Every one of his proposals used to be accompanied by a very concrete policy proposals. On the expenditure side, of course, he said that you have to spend more. Now, but where do you spend more? So he said you have to spend more basically on providing education. So the whole idea of compulsory, free, mass education, right, was given by Gokhale, and that almost 100 years later, the Indian government has adopted as the right to education under the Right to Education Act.
It so happened that Sarla Ray, who was the founder of the Gokhale Memorial School, and grandmother of the famous film director Satyajit Ray, once asked him that if you believe in equality and believe that before God everyone is equal, how is it that you wear this caste mark which signifies a certain social distinction? Gokhale actually fumbled for an answer and said, well, I have not really thought over it, but I'll let you know. And the only answer he could give Mrs. Ray was to send in an envelope his severed janva, after which he never wore a janva in his life, to the great regret of his mother.
At a time when education for girls and intercaste marriages were a taboo, not only did Gokhale educate his daughters up to post-graduation, but also married one of his daughters into a different caste.
I think Gokhale, much like his mentor, Justice Ranade, refrained from using what I'd call the religious idiom in politics. He believed right in the beginning that anything that would upset communal harmony would be detrimental to India sooner than later. Gokhale's faith in communal harmony, which Gandhi later on inherited and practiced in his own way.
Strong belief in service to the country, without the binding of caste or religion, drove him to start the Servants of India Society, where all the members would have only one religion, service of the country.
The country will always be the first.
Will always be the first
in my thoughts.
In my thoughts.
And I will give to her service.
And I will give to her service
the best.
The best
that is in me.
That is in me.
In serving the country.
In serving the country.
I will seek. no personal advantage.
No personal advantage
for myself.
सर्वात महत्त्वाचं एक शपथ म्हणजे असे आहे की मी माझ्या व माझ्या कुटुंबियांसाठी कोणत्याही पैशाचं उद्योगधंदा या मार्केटमधून कमवणार नाही. जे काही सर्वंट्स ऑफ इंडिया सोसायटी जे काही मला मानधन देईल त्या मानधनावरतीच मी माझं आयुष्याची गुजराण करेल. आणि जे काही सर्वंट्स ऑफ इंडिया सोसायटीतून जे मला मानधन मिळेल त्याच्यावरती मी खुश राहीन.
The mission was to serve the nation as a servant of India. This was the motto of Gokhale. Without distinction of caste, creed and religion, I will serve my motherland as a servant. So actually, during the time of Devdar, we had the society entered into more social welfare work. Throughout India, in different places, in all the states, most probably we were doing, the society was doing this distress relief where there were natural calamities all over India, and spread education in India. Actually, all the backward areas covered by the Servants of India Society.
Which is one of the first non-missionary organizations in India. You see, it's not attached to any religion. It's not like the Arya Samaj or the Ramakrishna Mission or the Jesuits or the Jamaat, which are voluntary organizations, social service organizations, working with poor people, trying to bring them relief from suffering or poverty, but with a religious edge to them. In a sense, Gokhale inaugurated a tradition through the Servants of India Society, which continues till this day. I mean, and it's of course become much deeper, wider, the civil society movement, social activism.
In 1906, Gokhale was elected the president of the Congress, and in his presidential speech, he strongly denounced the partition of Bengal on communal lines.
In 1908, Tilak was deported to Mandalay for 6 years. Now those 6 years were the years of Gokhale. Gokhale was, of course, councillor, and he used to visit London time and again, had a discussion with I had discussions with the British parliamentarians and administrators, including Morley and Minto in particular. Now, it is with Morley and Minto that the draft of the political reform, which otherwise goes with the name of Morley-Minto. But there is third name in that, and that name is Gokhale. So it was the draft which gave some limited, however, of course, rights, political rights to India. The credit goes to Gokhale.
Service of the country and pursuit for rights of Indians had become Gokhale's religion, which he followed with morality and sincerity. This is also what we now call spiritualization of politics.
I would call it ethical politics. You see, what was true about Gokhale and what is true about Gandhi and what sets them apart from some of their contemporaries and certainly sets them apart totally from the politicians of the present day is that they always use courteous language. Even with the British, when they disagreed with their policies, they said, we disagree with you for this reason. Or with their contemporaries in the freedom struggle. I mean, when Gokhale disagreed with Tilak or Gandhi disagreed with Jinnah or Ambedkar, they always used very courteous language. They never accused the opponent of bad faith, and that's very different from politicians today who are always abusing one another, calling them names. So in that sense, I would call it ethical politics.
In 1896, when Gandhiji came to India to garner support for his struggle in South Africa, he met several Indian leaders.
Gandhi had chosen his own way. I mean, before he came in contact with Gokhale. Now the point is that who could be the person most fitting to my way? That is Gandhi's way. And it was naturally Gokhale. So therefore Gandhiji accepted Gokhale as Guru. And naturally the legacy would be Ranade, Gokhale and Gandhiji.
Gokhale is a towering figure in Indian politics. Gandhi in the diaspora is an activist, he's a lawyer, he's respected by the Indians in Transvaal and Natal, but he's not really known in India. So Gokhale helps Gandhi become known in India. Mahatma Gandhi is a great leader, he's a visionary, and if he was to come back to India, he would be at the head of our struggle. This is what he says, all right. Now, so it's a great endorsement.
It so happened that Gokhale then proposed this indentured labor bill to stop this labor.
Labor was abolished and indentured labor was put in its place. That was the history of indentured labor. Perhaps his most passionate, most moving speech would be his speech on indentured labor in the Legislative Council.
Under this system, those who are recruited bind themselves first to go to a distinct and unknown land, the language, the usages and customs of which they do not know, and where they have no friends and relatives. Secondly, they bind themselves to work there for any employer to whom they may be allotted, whom they do not know, and who does not know them, and in whose choice they have no voice. Thirdly, they bind themselves to live there on the estate of the employer and must not go anywhere without a special permit, and must do whatever tasks are assigned to them, no matter how irksome those tasks may be. India is the only country which supplies indentured labor at the present moment. Why should India be marked out for this degradation? The conscience of our people, unfortunately asleep too long, is now waking up to the enormity of this question. And I have no doubt that it will not rest till it has asserted itself. And I ask the government not to make the mistake of ignoring a sentiment which is dear to us, namely the sentiment of our self-respect.
He was one of those who actually were able to not empathize with the Indian indentured labor, which had felt that they were uprooted from their own countries and taken to foreign lands with their links snapped. But his role in South Africa was not just about creating empathy, but about instilling in them the basic belief that even if you're out of India, you have rights in the country that you are in, and your links to India can always be restored and fostered. Now, these are the two crucial messages that Gandhiji himself in South Africa was trying to always project.
The Gandhi-Gokhale relationship, which started as a fight against indentured labor, spread across all these continents. And then Gokhale became a father figure for the people who were facing such kind of atrocities. And they started writing letters, contacting him through different media to help them out. In fact, you will see that all these areas, that whether it's Fiji, Mauritius, Guinea, South Africa, and variety of, they looked upon Gokhale as one of those men who could help them out.
Gokhale was I would say, he was an economist and a leader of international stature in his time. And he may have been perhaps the first Indian to enjoy that stature, which later, of course, Gandhiji and several other Indian leaders enjoyed. He was not just an economist who only manipulated numbers and made balance sheets balance and budgets balance. He had a very, very strong humanistic element, right? So I would say he was one of the earliest humanist economists in the country, right? The first thing he called attention to on the taxation front, he said that we should reduce two types of taxes first. First is the reduction in salt duty. Salt is consumed by poor masses of this country. And it is very wrong to tax it at the highest rate. And this was a subject, incidentally, on which he spoke for the next 10 years of his life, on the reduction of salt duty. And you know that later on, this got converted into the famous Dandi March by Mahatma Gandhi, where Mahatma Gandhi said, I am not going to pay a single penny in salt, in tax on salt.
Other thing that Gokhale understood was the importance of media, the importance of touching millions of hearts. His speeches through gatherings and meetings, his moving across India. The other media is the use of press, which was the only source of media then. Gokhale started as an editor quite early. But when his movement grew, the idea of having a press of their own was something on his mind. And so Gnan Prakash started from Pune. He acquired a paper in Allahabad, Hindustan, an Urdu paper. He acquired a paper from Nagpur called Hitavad, and several other small magazines to spread the message.
He visits Gandhi in South Africa in 1912, spends several months, 6 or 8 weeks, comes back and gives a speech in Mumbai where again he says, Mr. Gandhi, if you look at how he led this movement and how he inspired people to go to jail, I mean, he is a true hero. He's a truly great visionary leader and hero, because he's made martyrs out of ordinary men. So that's quite striking that in that sense Gokhale is building up Gandhi. Gandhi is unknown and Gokhale is providing his entire, he's backing Gandhi with his own prestige, his authority and standing. So in 1909, in a famous speech in Mumbai, 1913, and of course when Gandhi comes back in 1915. So you're quite right. Apart from the financial support, apart from the intellectual and political advice that he gives Gandhi, he also makes Gandhi much better known in India by generously praising him and telling Indians about his remarkable qualities as a leader, as an activist, as someone who can inspire ordinary people towards the path of struggle and sacrifice. So in that sense, he helps make Gandhi a household name in India.
After his return from South Africa, Gokhale was busy creating the draft of the dominant political structure for India, but his health was not supporting him.
Gandhi used to say that he used to worry about Gokhale's health because Gokhale was slightly overweight. I think he was also diabetic. He had a health condition. Gandhi used to worry about his health. And Gandhi used to keep on advising him to eat, to exercise more, to eat different kinds of foods, not to travel so much, not to burden himself with overwork. And he was always worried that Gokhale would die a premature death because of his overwork. Because he basically lived and died, for his country, in the service of his country.
Don't waste your time in writing a biography, setting up a statue. Pour your whole soul into the service of India. Then only shall you be counted amongst her true and faithful servants.
Gandhiji's fear came true, and Gokhale passed away on 19th February 1915 at the age of 49.
The jewel of the country, diamond of Maharashtra, and prince of workers, rest here today in eternal peace. It is worthy that you all must emulate him.
I don't think anyone in public life at that time could have paid this homage, and coming as it did from his political and ideological foe is remarkable.
Gokhale's followers did in fact emulate him. His most well-known follower, Gandhiji, charted his own path of the freedom struggle, but Gokhale's values and principles like purity of means, human equality, and spiritualized politics guided him throughout. Through all the educational institutions that he started and those that are inspired by him, through all those children throughout the country who are receiving free education, through all the social struggles that are carried on through constitutional methods, through all those Indians who work for the progress of the economy, through all those citizens who give up everything to serve the country. Gokhale lives on.
To my mind, he was the first great humanist leader of India, the first great parliamentarian of India.
A transparent and outstandingly honest man with a profound insight into the mechanics of politics.
The ideas of Gopal Krishna Gokhale, the values he stood for, the kind of battles that he fought, are more relevant in the early part of the 21st century than they were in the early part of the 20th.
Gandhi comes back to India in January 1915, and Gokhale I think dies within a month of that. And who knows how it would have turned out? It may have turned out in a very complicated way if Gokhale had lived, because Gokhale would have wanted Gandhi to join the Servants of India Society, and Gandhi may have wanted to choose a political path. So that's an interesting what if of history, that Gokhale's early death allowed Gandhi to forge his own career in India.